Everything you were taught about how to get close to powerful people was wrong. Not a little wrong. Systematically, structurally wrong. In a way that was almost designed to keep you working harder and harder, while the actual distance between you and the rooms that matter stayed exactly the same. You were taught that the path to power runs through demonstrated competence, that if you work harder, deliver better, perform more consistently, the people at the top of every hierarchy you navigate will eventually notice you, pull you closer, and hand you access to everything that access to them makes possible. That framework contains real truth, which is exactly what makes it so effective at keeping people trapped inside it for decades. Competence is necessary, it is not sufficient, and the men who figured out that distinction early, who understood that being good at the work and being irreplaceable to powerful people are two entirely separate projects, those men are not more talented than you. They are operating with a different map. This is that map. Machiavelli watched this dynamic play out his entire professional life. In the courts of Florence, in diplomatic missions across the volatile landscape of Renaissance Italy, in the rise and fall of men who were brilliant and men who were merely strategic. He lost his position, his freedom, briefly, and his access to everything he had spent 20 years building. Not because he lacked competence, but because he had not made himself genuinely indispensable to the people who held the power he needed. The Prince, written in exile in 1513, is partly a field manual for rulers and partly something raw, the document of a man who finally understood the mechanics of proximity to power with the clarity that only comes from having lost it. What follows are the 13 laws he encoded in that understanding, translated into the specific behavioral principles that determine whether powerful people keep you close or forget you exist. Before this goes any further, if this is the content that finally says what most people are too careful or too polished to say plainly, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel, because what gets built here goes deep and stays honest. Turn on the notification bell so you do not miss what comes next. And do something that genuinely matters to this community. Drop your location and the exact time you are watching this right now in the comments. Whether it is a Wednesday morning in Edinburgh before the day pulls you in a dozen directions, a quiet Sunday afternoon in Brisbane when you finally have an hour to yourself, a Friday evening in Chicago when the week is behind you and you are ready to think, or a midnight in Lagos when the rest of the house is asleep and it is you and the things you are still working on. Write it in the comments, because the people watching this right now are spread across every corner of the world at every hour, and knowing that this conversation is happening that broadly and that honestly is one of the most remarkable things about what is being built here. Now let us go into the 13 laws. The first law is the one that most people understand intellectually and violate continuously in practice, because the habit it requires runs against every instinct that social situations naturally produce. When you are in the presence of a powerful person, when you finally have their attention, when the moment you have been working toward has arrived, the gravitational pull of that moment is toward you, toward what you want, toward what you need from them, toward the version of the conversation that ends with you closer to something you have been pursuing. And the person who follows that pull, who speaks into that moment from the position of their own interests, has already disqualified themselves from the inner circle in a way they will not understand until they look back years later. Machiavelli was explicit in The Prince. Men move not for virtue, but for advantage and necessity. Not for your virtue, not for your need, for their advantage, for what addresses their necessity. The prince who understood this, who spoke to allies from the position of their interests rather than his own, held their cooperation not because they liked him or felt morally obligated, but because the relationship consistently produced something they valued. And that is a more durable foundation for influence than being liked, because being liked depends on mood and circumstance, while being useful to someone's interests depends only on your ability to understand what those interests are and position every interaction from inside them. The behavioral discipline this law requires is asking, before you walk into any room where a powerful person is present, what that person is actually trying to accomplish. What are they worried about? What problem sits at the top of their mind that they have not fully solved? When you know that, When you have thought carefully about what the world looks like from inside their position, you can speak from there instead of from yours. You are no longer someone asking for something. You are someone who understands what they need. And people who understand what powerful people need are always, without exception, closer to power than people who are exceptionally good at their jobs. Comment below, I move with intention, not desperation. Because every conversation with a powerful person begins before you enter the room. The second law builds directly on the first and takes it a level deeper. There is a difference between speaking to someone's interests in general and positioning yourself as the specific solution to their most pressing, unsolved problem. And that difference is the difference between being a pleasant and useful person in someone's orbit and being the person they call before they call anyone else. Most people operate at the first level. They are agreeable, helpful, broadly contributing, and consequently valued in a diffuse, easily replaceable way. The person who operates at the second level has identified the one problem keeping the powerful person up at night, the specific exposure, the unresolved tension, the gap between where they are and where they need to be, and has made themselves the answer to that specific problem. The common definition of being useful is, do your job well and be reliable. The Machiavellian inversion is, identify the one thing this person cannot afford to get wrong, and become the person whose presence makes getting it right possible. The common version produces a reliable colleague. The inverted version produces a relationship where the powerful person actively thinks about you when you are not in the room, not because of what you have done, but because of what they would lose if you were not available when the specific problem only you solve becomes urgent. And urgency is the condition under which powerful people reveal who actually matters to them and who they merely tolerate. The mastery of this law requires setting aside self-interest long enough to genuinely understand someone else's situation, not to position yourself for the next conversation, but to actually understand where their position is most vulnerable, where their performance is being measured, where the gap between what is expected and what they currently have is widest. That gap is your position, not exploitation, genuine value. When you fill it with real capability, real delivery, actual value rather than performance, you have created a dependency that operates on its own logic, without requiring you to manage it or remind anyone of your contribution. The need is self-evident, and self-evident need is the most durable form of proximity there is. Comment below, I observe before I move, because the problem you solve for them is already visible. You only need to see it clearly enough to address it. Pay careful attention here, because this law costs more people their position in powerful circles through a mistake that feels, in the moment, like generosity or confidence. The mistake is over-delivery, not working too hard but giving away too much of what you know, too completely, too early, making yourself fully legible and therefore fully substitutable. When you hand a powerful person everything, your complete method, your complete analysis, your complete intelligence on a situation, you have made yourself replaceable by the very quality they valued you for. The next person who reads the document you produced can understand what you understood. At some point, you are no longer the indispensable source of the insight. You are one of the people who has access to it. And in the economy of powerful circles, access is common. Source is scarce. The mechanism at work is the same one that drives every intelligence dynamic at every level of human organization. The person who holds the map is powerful. The person handed a copy of it is merely informed. Machiavelli's consistent finding was that the men who maintained their position longest were perpetually useful without being fully transparent, delivering enough to demonstrate their value without delivering so completely that the value could be replicated without them. In practice, this law asks you to develop a discipline of strategic incompleteness, not deception or selfishness, but the deliberate calibration of what you deliver so that the full picture requires continued access to you. You give the analysis and withhold the full methodology. You solve the current problem completely and position yourself as the natural address for the next one. You are never depleting the account. You are maintaining the conditions under which a return to you remains necessary. The powerful people in whose orbit you operate register this not as manipulation, but as depth. The sense that there is always more to this person than has been revealed, which is exactly the quality that keeps powerful people curious rather than dismissive. Drop in the comments, "My silence is calculated." Because the most powerful thing you can give a powerful person is the sense that there is more. Every powerful person has been surrounded since their earliest experience of power by people who change in their presence, who become more agreeable when stakes are high, who modulate their positions based on what they perceive the powerful person wants to hear, and they know it, not always consciously, but in the way any organism that has received a signal consistently over many years begins to register it as the default condition of every interaction. The powerful person surrounded by this type of behavioral accommodation has developed an involuntary radar for who is doing it and who is not. The person who is not, who is the same under pressure as in comfort, who holds their assessment regardless of whether it is what the room wants to hear, registers as something rare enough to be worth keeping close. The antithesis is absolute. On one side is the person whose composure depends on the approval of the room, who is articulate when agreement flows and hedging when it does not, whose body language announces that a disagreement has landed as a personal threat rather than as information to be assessed. On the other side is the person whose internal state is genuinely independent of what the room produces, who can disagree with the most powerful person present without the quality of that disagreement changing based on the power differential, who can absorb challenge without defending, who can hold silence in the tension of a difficult moment without filling it to relieve their own discomfort. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, never intended for publication, which is exactly what gives it the honesty of something genuinely believed, that the object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. What he meant was the reactive, approval-dependent mode of living that most people accept as normal. The sovereign mode, operating from the inside rather than responding to whatever the outside generates, is rare because it is hard to develop and harder to maintain under pressure. But the powerful person who encounters it recognizes it immediately. Genuine composure in the presence of power is the rarest currency in any social environment. And rare things, as every law of social psychology confirms, are assigned the highest value. Comment below, "I govern myself, nothing else governs me," because that composure is the foundation every other law in this framework rests on. Here is the one that the most competent people most consistently miss, because it requires a quality of attentiveness to someone else's experience that the ambitious and achievement-oriented mind naturally redirects toward its own performance. Powerful people exist inside a particular social experience that most people outside their orbit do not fully appreciate. The experience of being surrounded by people who are competing to impress them, to be seen by them, to extract something from them, which means that almost every interaction a powerful person has is colored by the awareness of what the other person wants from the exchange. It becomes background noise. It becomes something they absorb and manage automatically, efficiently, with the practiced ease of someone who has been doing it for years. And into that background noise, occasionally, appears someone who is not competing, not extracting, not performing for them. Someone who is, in fact, making them look better in the rooms and conversations and evaluations that matter most to them, without being asked to, without it being transactional, without any visible agenda attached. That person is not noticed in the way the competitors are noticed. They are felt. And the difference between being noticed and being felt is the difference between being a name on a list and being a person who is thought of specifically in the quiet moments when the powerful person is assessing who around them is actually on their side. The behavioral application is specific. Identify the rooms, relationships, and reputations the powerful person cares most about, and find every legitimate opportunity to advance them in those rooms, whether or not anyone is watching, whether or not there is any short-term return to you, because the powerful person will hear about it. They always do. and what they hear will not be filtered through the self-interest that colors every self-report. It will come from a third party, landing with the credibility that direct self-promotion never carries. Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme art of war is to win without fighting. In social power, the equivalent is to become essential without competing, to arrive in the powerful person's inner circle not through direct pursuit, but through accumulated evidence, reaching them through multiple channels, that you are the person who reliably makes their world better without requiring anything visible in return. Before every significant interaction, ask what you can do that will make their world better in a room you will not be in. Do that thing. Say nothing about it. Wait for the weight of it to arrive. Comment below, I am the standard now, because the person who elevates others without agenda never has to elevate themselves. Here is the trap that claims more capable people than almost any other dynamic in the psychology of power, through a specific category of success that makes them visible as a competitor to someone above them. You have worked for years to develop real capability, and in the moment when you finally have the attention of someone powerful, the natural impulse is to demonstrate exactly how good you are, to let them see the full measure of what you have built. That impulse, followed, is the mechanism of your own exclusion. Powerful people do not pull closer the person who demonstrates they could replace them. They manage them. They find reasons to keep them at a controlled distance. Machiavelli observed in The Prince, "The innovator has for enemies all those who have done well under old conditions." The person who makes the powerful feel threatened is not kept close as an ally. They are managed as a potential opponent, a different relationship with an entirely different quality of access. The strategic alternative is not false modesty. It is the deliberate positioning of your capability as an extension of their capability, rather than something that stands independently of them. Your insight makes their judgment better. Your analysis makes their decision stronger. Your execution makes their vision real. You are not demonstrating that you could do their job. You are demonstrating that you make their job more possible, more significant. That is the positioning that produces genuine closeness, because it creates a mutual benefit that does not carry the threat of replacement. The practical application is a discipline of framing. Every piece of work you produce, every recommendation you make, frame it as an input to their judgment rather than as a conclusion that renders their judgment unnecessary. Ask for their perspective on your thinking rather than presenting your thinking as settled. Position your capability as a resource they access rather than as an independent source competing with their own. This is not performance. It is the honest recognition that in a power relationship, the person below is always more effective when adding to the person above rather than challenging them. And the powerful person who feels genuinely enhanced by your presence rather than subtly threatened by it becomes your most active advocate in every room you are not in. Drop in the comments, "I play the long game," because the person who positions beside power eventually gets invited inside it. The seventh law produces the most immediate, viscerally felt shift in how powerful people experience your presence, and it is the one that feels most counterintuitive to people who have spent years believing consistent availability is the foundation of valuable relationships. Powerful people do not assign value based on availability. They assign it based on scarcity. A documented feature of human psychology confirmed across decades of behavioral economics research. The person who is always available has trained that powerful person to expect availability as the default condition of the relationship. Defaults are not valued. Defaults are assumed. And the person who is assumed is the last person thought of when something genuinely important is being decided. The entry-level application is the simplest. Do not respond immediately to every contact. Let some time pass, not as a game, as a practice. The response that arrives in 4 hours carries more weight than the one that arrives in 4 minutes, because the 4-hour response communicates that this person has other demands on their time, other rooms that compete for their attention. Powerful people register it immediately, because it is the same signal they broadcast to everyone beneath them in the hierarchy. The deeper application requires more discipline. Be selectively unavailable for things that do not represent your highest contribution. Decline some invitations. Miss some meetings that do not require your specific presence. Each absence, managed with the composed confidence of someone who governs their own time rather than responding to every claim on it, adds weight to every subsequent presence. The gathering you attend after several you did not carries a different quality of attention from everyone present. Your arrival cannot be taken for granted. The Machiavellian principle is simple and old. What is rare is valued. What is common is ignored. And the man who manages his own scarcity manufactures his own perceived worth. Comment below. I choose. I do not chase. Because the presence that can be withdrawn is the presence that is felt. The eighth law is built on one of the most consistently documented principles in all of social psychology, a principle that Robert Cialdini's field research confirmed across decades of empirical study. The principle is reciprocity, the deeply wired human tendency to return what has been given, to feel a specific and often uncomfortable obligation when a favor arrives without having been requested. The law as it applies to making powerful people need you is this: deploy this mechanism before you need anything from it. Not transactionally, not with the visible intent of creating an obligation you will later call in. Genuinely, without agenda, in advance of any moment where you will want something from the relationship. The mistake most people make is investing in the relationship at the moment they need something from it, reaching out when they have an ask, making themselves useful when a request is coming. The powerful person, who has seen this pattern hundreds of times, recognizes it instantly. The request carries the smell of the investment that preceded it, and the recognition changes the quality of the response. The person who invested consistently and genuinely before any ask was visible, who offered value, solved problems, contributed without any visible agenda, arrives at their moment of need with a relational account already in credit. The ask lands differently. It carries the relationship rather than the transaction, and relationships produce different outcomes than transactions. Cialdini's research confirmed that reciprocity is triggered even by uninvited favors. People feel the obligation to return even what they did not request, when the giving was genuine rather than calculated. This is the quality the law asks you to bring: warm, consistent, genuinely unconditional investment. You give because you have assessed that this person and this relationship are worth it, and the investment made from that position produces returns that no visible transaction could ever replicate. Drop in the comments, I move, everything else adjusts. Because the person who invests before they ask never has to beg for what they need. There is a specific quality of attention that powerful people rarely receive. Not compliments or praise or visible admiration, which they receive in abundance and which has stopped meaning much. The attention they rarely receive is the attention that reads what they have not said, that registers the unspoken concern in the room, that hears the gap between what is being stated as the problem and what the actual problem is. This quality of attention, treating the person across from you as a legible human being whose interior states are more informative than their surface presentation, is so rare that the person who demonstrates it consistently becomes, very quickly, one of the few the powerful person trusts to be around when the stakes are highest. The deeper definition of being perceptive, the one that produces genuine closeness to powerful people, is understanding what someone needs before they have to ask for it, because you have been paying the quality of attention that makes their interior state as readable to you as their words. Most people enter conversations with powerful people in a state of high self-monitoring, watching themselves, managing their impression, calculating what they are producing in the other person's assessment, which means they are not actually present in the conversation at all. They are managing a performance of presence. The person who sets that self-monitoring aside, genuinely curious, genuinely attentive to what is happening beneath the surface of what is being said, produces an experience in the powerful person that feels like being understood. And being understood by someone is among the most compelling relational experiences available to any human being, regardless of their position or power. Sun Tzu's most penetrating insight was not strategic, but observational, that the general who reads the terrain before moving in it wins before the battle begins. In the terrain of a powerful person's inner world, the signals are constant. The observer who reads them, tracking the subtle shifts in energy, the specific words chosen, the topics that produce engagement versus contraction, has access to intelligence that no amount of general competence can replicate. Comment below, I see the board clearly now, because the person who reads what is unspoken is the person trusted with what is most important. This is the law that most directly separates the person who is close to power from the person who is merely around it. Most people in any powerful person's orbit operate as followers of that person's reputation. They affirm it in public, they repeat it in the rooms the powerful person occupies, and they say nothing about it in the rooms the powerful person does not. Which means the reputation that reaches those rooms is determined by whoever happens to be talking. The person who applies the 10th law has understood something more precise and more valuable, that the conversations happening about a powerful person in the rooms they cannot enter are among the most consequential inputs into how that powerful person is perceived, and that the person who consistently and genuinely represents them well in those rooms has taken on a function that no one can fake, no one can buy, and no one can easily replace. Reputation damage travels faster and further than reputation building, which means the absence of a defender is not neutral. It is an opportunity for every rival, every person with a grievance, to fill the narrative vacuum with something that serves their interests rather than the powerful person's. The person who occupies that space, not as a sycophant, but as someone whose genuine assessment is consistently positive and consistently accurate, becomes a structural necessity in that powerful person's social environment. Not a favor the powerful person chose to accept, a function they cannot easily do without. The behavioral practice is simple. In every room where the powerful person is discussed and absent, bring to that assessment the quality of representation you would want someone bringing to yours when you are not in the room. Not unconditional defense. That reads as loyalty purchased, honest, balanced, genuinely favorable representation that reflects your real view and happens to protect what they have built. That is the advocacy that reaches a powerful person through channels they trust, and when it does, it changes the entire quality of how they think about you. Comment below. I release what no longer serves me, because the person who protects a powerful person's name in their absence earns permanent proximity to their presence. The 11th law is one that violates, on the surface, what seems like the obvious strategy, which is to give powerful people exactly what they want at every moment, in every interaction, so that being around you feels frictionless and easy. The problem with that strategy is not that it is wrong in intent. It is wrong in outcome, because the powerful person who has been surrounded by people giving them what they want at every moment has developed an immunity to that dynamic. They can feel the absence of resistance the way a person who has been in a loud room for a long time can suddenly hear the silence when the noise stops. And what they feel, in the absence of any genuine friction, is not comfort. It is the awareness that they are being managed, and people who feel managed pull away from the people managing them, because being managed by someone below you in a hierarchy is one of the more quietly intolerable experiences available in professional life. The antithesis. On one side is the person who agrees, confirms, validates, softens every edge, producing a comfortable but shallow experience of the relationship. On the other side is the person who engages genuinely, who agrees when agreement is honest, disagrees when disagreement is accurate, asks the question no one else is asking, and brings honest participation to every interaction that makes the powerful person feel they are in the presence of someone whose view is real and therefore worth having. The bridge between those two modes is the cultivation of genuine opinion, not contrarianism, but the actual development of a perspective you arrived at through your own assessment and will hold until better information changes it. Machiavelli's warning about flatterers in The Prince was among his most urgent. He described them as a plague in courts, the disease that most reliably destroys a prince's judgment, because the prince who surrounds himself with people who tell him what he wants to hear has isolated himself from the reality his decisions must navigate. The person who brings the powerful person's unfiltered reality to them, tactfully, with genuine care for the outcome but without softening that converts the truth into something less than useful, is worth more than any number of comfortable validators. and they know it. The person who makes a powerful person feel genuinely engaged rather than gently managed is the person who gets called when it actually matters. Drop in the comments, "I am not managed, I am respected," because the person who refuses to manage the powerful earns their genuine trust. Here is the law that requires the most subtlety to apply without crossing into manipulation, but that is also, when applied with genuine care, one of the most profoundly useful things any person can do in a relationship. Every powerful person has a version of themselves they prefer, not the version they perform publicly, but the version in which the qualities they value most about themselves are consistently visible and expressed. That version is their aspiration, and the person who, in their presence, consistently reflects back that aspirational version, who responds to their best qualities in a way that makes those qualities feel real rather than distant, has done something that no title or salary can replicate. They have made the powerful person feel, in the truest sense, like the person they want to be. This is not flattery. Flattery is the false attribution of qualities that are not present. What this law describes is the accurate recognition of qualities that are genuinely present, expressed at moments when the person can receive that recognition in a way that confirms rather than inflates. When a powerful person makes a genuinely insightful decision, you note the precision of the thinking. When they demonstrate generosity that is genuinely remarkable, you register it in a way that makes the quality visible, not to please them, but because it is accurate and because visibility makes it more likely to recur. You are reflecting the identity they aspire to back to them with enough accuracy that it feels real, and real things get repeated. The mastery of this law produces something remarkable over time. The powerful person begins to associate your presence with a version of themselves they are proud of. They become, in the presence of that association, slightly more likely to express the qualities you have consistently reflected, and the relationship, for both of you, becomes genuinely elevating rather than transactional. Comment below, "My evolution is non-negotiable," because the person who helps a powerful person become more of who they want to be has created the most lasting bond available in any professional or social relationship. The 13th law makes all the others possible, because without it, the first 12 collapse into performance, behaviors deployed from a position of need that the powerful person will eventually read correctly as exactly that. The law is this: build your alternative. Construct deliberately and with as much seriousness as any other project in your professional life, the version of your circumstances in which you do not need this particular powerful person's proximity to have what you need. Not because you intend to use the alternative, you may never activate it, but because the alternative changes the quality of everything you do inside the primary relationship in a way no technique or framework can replicate. The weak position in any relationship with a powerful person is the position of exclusive dependency, where the access they represent, the opportunities they can provide, the doors they can open, are the only viable path to what you are trying to build. From that position, every interaction carries the invisible weight of everything you cannot afford to lose. And powerful people feel that weight the way a negotiator feels the urgency of a counterpart who cannot afford to walk away, not through any single tell, but through the accumulated texture of 100 small behavioral signals. The speed of your responses, the frequency of your contact, the way your energy shifts when the relationship goes quiet, the concessions you make before they are requested, all of it announces, in the language that power reads fluently, this person needs me more than I need them. And in that configuration, the balance of the relationship is settled in a way that no amount of competence or value or genuine contribution can entirely correct. Machiavelli's deepest counsel was that the wise man should never put himself entirely at the mercy of another's fortune, because the man at the mercy of another's fortune is the man whose position changes when that fortune changes, and fortune always changes. The alternative you build does not need to equal what the primary relationship provides. It needs to be real, viable, and genuinely livable. Real enough that your nervous system knows it is available, that the option of departure is not catastrophic. And once that is true, something shifts in every interaction that no deliberate technique can produce. The composure becomes genuine. The patience becomes structural. The willingness to disagree, to bring the real view rather than the accommodated one, all of it becomes natural rather than disciplined, because none of it is costing you the thing you cannot afford to lose. The walk-away position is not the abandonment of the relationship, it is the throne from which the relationship is governed. And the person who sits on that throne, genuinely present by choice rather than necessity, is the person the powerful person is most eager to keep close. Because the powerful have learned that the people who do not need them are the only ones they can actually trust. Every one of these 13 laws, speaking to their interests, becoming the solution to their most pressing problem, controlling information strategically, developing composure that cannot be rattled, making them look good in the rooms they care about, positioning beside them rather than competing, creating scarcity around your availability, deploying reciprocity before you need it, reading what they have not said, protecting their reputation in rooms they cannot enter, refusing to make them feel managed, reflecting the version of themselves they prefer, and building the alternative that makes the walk-away real. These are not 13 separate techniques, they are one system. A system that describes what it looks like to be genuinely valuable to a powerful person in a way that produces not admiration, not polite inclusion, but genuine need. The need that is felt when you are absent. The need that produces the call, the invitation, the consultation that the people who outperform everyone and wait to be noticed are still waiting for. Machiavelli wrote from exile. He had lost the proximity to power that had defined his entire adult life, and what he produced in that loss was the clearest map of how that proximity is built and sustained. Not because he was bitter or cynical, but because he was finally free of the need to tell anyone what they wanted to hear. That freedom produced the honesty every one of these 13 laws is built from. The only question left is not whether this is true. You have known some version of this for years, felt it in the gap between your output and your access, recognized it in the people who moved past you without being more capable. The question is what you do with it now. The system is yours. The map is here. The only remaining variable is whether you use it. Subscribe if you want to go further, because what gets built here goes deeper and stays more honest than most content is willing to go. And leave a comment with the law that hit you hardest, not the one that surprised you, the one you already knew somewhere and are finally ready to act on.